Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to the second day of the Asia 2021 Congress. We had a very good start last night as we look at the unity in the Asian Church, and we thank God for Bishop Ephraim Tindero for the challenging presentation and the case study from the network of house churches in China. This night, we will have another exciting session as we look at the shape of the Asian Church in 2021. The Asian Church has grown from about 2.2% in 1900 to a projected 9.7% in 2025 of the total population of the continent. That is to some 450 million Christians. The growth has ranged from slow or even negative, such as in North Korea, to moderate or even spectacular. This session aims to provide an overview of the broad continental trends as well as those in its nations. What are the things for which we can praise God? And what are the challenges for prayer? What lessons should the Asian Church draw from these advances, setbacks, and challenges before us? Now we'll go to the presentation on the overview of the growth of the Asian Church in the past 120 years and the broad continental trends. And we're grateful that Dr. Todd Johnson is with us for this presentation. Dr. Johnson is the Eva B. and Paul E. Thoms Distinguished Professor of Mission and Global Christianity and co-director of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. He's visiting research fellow at Boston University's Institute for Culture, Religion, and World Affairs, leading a research project on international religious demography. He is co-author, co-editor of several books that have given us very useful information on Christianity in Asia and also global Christianity. So we are excited to hear from your presentation now, Dr. Todd Johnson.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you. And let me get started here. This presentation is based on the Center for the Study of Global Christianity's research. And we have been in continuous operation for 56 years now. We started in 1965 in Kenya. And many of you know that our founder was Dr. David Barrett. And let me see, I gotta get, okay, here we go. And he published the World Christian Encyclopedia in 1982. Time magazine called this first edition a miracle from Nairobi, because our founder, David Barrett, managed to document 20,000 Christian denominations around the world, and he did it all from Africa in the 1960s and 1970s. He visited 212 of the 223 countries in the world in that period. So we're really grateful to him. He's passed on about 10 years ago now. I joined Barrett in 1989, and he and I produced the second edition in 2001, now in identifying 33,000 Christian denominations around the world. And then finally, just a couple of years ago, late in 2019, Dr. Gina Zerlo and I completed the third edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia, now listing 45,000 denominations. We managed to do this one book launch at the Pew Research Center in Washington, D.C. This was February of 2020, just before the pandemic began. This volume, like those in the past, covers every country in the world, including all 50 countries in Asia. In addition, we produced the Atlas of Global Christianity in 2009, and then followed this up with a series called the Edinburgh Companions to Global Christianity. And 3 of these volumes cover Asia. Volume 2 is Christianity in North Africa and West Asia. Volume 3, Christianity in South and Central Asia. And Volume 4, Christianity in East and Southeast Asia. Each volume has 35 essays written by Christian scholars from that region. And I'm depending on these findings for my talk today. Now, as we get started, let's remember that according to the United Nations, Asia is defined as 5 regions, stretching all the way from Turkey in the west to the Philippines in the east. And those are Western Asia, then Central Asia, South Asia, Eastern Asia, and Southeastern Asia. So we're talking about a huge portion of the world's population here, and we'll try to cover a little bit of each of these. Now, the first question that we're normally asked when we do presentations is, where did you get these numbers? And that's a difficult question to answer, except to say that we've been working on our method and publishing our method. So we've produced books and yearbooks and a journal, the Journal of Religion and Demography, that is a way for you at least to see how we do this, what methods do we use, and there are many different methods that can be used. And I'll say at the beginning that one of the methods that's unique to us is that most people that work in this field look at only surveys and census information, and we actually listen very closely to religious communities themselves, including, of course, churches. So we're paying attention not only to censuses and surveys, but to the churches themselves when it comes to Christianity. Okay, so as we start, we want to see also that Christianity is fundamentally Asian. Jesus was born, lived, preached, and died in Asia. That would be Western Asia that we're referring to, yet he is often seen as a Westerner or a European. We understand that when we speak of Christianity in Asia, we are not speaking of a foreign religion found in Asia, but of an ancient indigenous faith. Now, quantitative research on the history of Christianity shows that African and Asian Christians outnumbered European Christians for most of the first millennium. And again, of course, in the late 20th century. Now, based on this finding, there are 2 aspects of Christian history that require a global treatment. And first is these early centuries represent a global history, with, in fact, Africans and Asians in the majority until the year 923. But this is normally portrayed as a European history. But we know, for example, that the majority of Christian leaders at the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 were Africans and Asians. This map shows the strength of the churches of Persia from the 3rd to the 10th centuries. And it was during this period, as you know, that these churches reached China. Yet Nicaea is often considered a meeting of Europeans. So that's the first thing, is that our earliest history is Asian and African, it's global. The second piece here is that today Christians in the global South, which is identified by the United Nations as Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania. Christians in the global south once again outnumber those in the north. Nonetheless, this shift is often portrayed as the global expansion of a Western faith. So these two fallacies frame the core task of scholars and practitioners of the Christian tradition to recover its ancient global history and to rethink or reconceptualize its current global reality. Now, as an illustration, in June of 2014, I was leading a 3-week study abroad course in Uzbekistan for Gordon Conwell students focused on religions on the Silk Road. We traveled from Samarkand to Bukhara to Khiva and even spent 2 nights in a yurt in the desert. One day in the middle of our tour, my wife Trisha and I were quietly escorted down alleyways in Tashkent to arrive at a clandestine training meeting for Uzbek church leaders. The sessions were in Russian and Uzbek with translation for us in English. After several hours, when I thought we would be returning to the hotel, I was suddenly asked to speak to the group on the early history of Christianity in Central Asia, a subject that was part of our course. Though I didn't have any notes with me, I agreed to do this, but I decided to frame the talk in a fresh way. In the minds of my Uzbek audience, Americans like me typify the Christian faith, but I contrasted that perspective with the fact that my ancestors became Christians centuries later than theirs. After all, there were millions of Christians in Central Asia in the late 4th and earlier 5th centuries. Samarkand itself was a major hub for the Church of the East. My own story, on the other hand, is anchored much later in the 9th century when Vikings arrived in Iona in Scotland and promptly murdered 68 monks. My small audience was stunned and began to rethink their own identity as Christian believers. For me, this story represents a small recovery of the Asian history of the Christian faith. Now, let's talk about Asia today. Christians grew twice as fast as the general population over the 20th century and represent 8.2% of Asia's population in 2020. Christians are projected to reach about 11% by 2050. In 2020, Asia is home to 4.6 billion people out of 7.8 billion people worldwide, or 60% of the world's population. Yet the Christian community of about 379 million out of 2.5 billion is only 15% of all Christians. With this in mind, we ask, is it Asian to be Christian? Is it Christian to be Asian? Asia has experienced profound changes in its religious makeup since the beginning of the 20th century. Chinese folk religionists and Buddhists, who made up over 50% of Asia's population in 1900, fell to under 23% by 2020. And adherence to ethnic or traditional religions also fell slowly over the century from 5.3% of Asia's population in 1900 to 3.4% in 2020. At the same time, the Hindu population and total share grew, though Hindus are still concentrated on the Indian subcontinent. Muslims grew at a somewhat faster pace and displaced Chinese folk religionists as the continent's largest religion, with 27.4% of the population in 2020. And you can see the different sizes here, but each of these squares represents 1% of the population. This is from our atlas contrasting 1910 in 2010. Now, Asian Christians also face health and economic challenges. While China and India ramp up economic power, Asian cities are some of the most polluted in the world. Access to education is a struggle, with 54% of Christians in Asia lacking at least a secondary education. Education is a particular challenge for girls, and not just in places like Afghanistan. Low human development indexes are also found among Christians in Nepal, Myanmar, and some states in India. And Western Asia, as we'll see, has been hit hard by war. Christians in Iraq and Syria in particular live in desperate situations, many in refugee camps throughout the region. Syria in particular dropped in the human development rank from 128th in all the countries in the world down to 155th in 2017, with Christians disproportionately impacted. Now, in the 19th and early 20th century, Asia was an important destination of Western missionaries, many who believed in Asian society's eventual acceptance of Christianity and Western civilization. But contrary to most expectations, however, Asia has become the most non-religious continent in the 20th century, and we know this was due to the spread of communist regimes whose policies prohibited religions and propagated atheistic ideology. Agnostics and atheists grew the fastest, averaging nearly 10% per year over the entire century. In 1900, the non-religious numbered fewer than 55,000, but by 2020, more than 640 million, or just under 14% of Asia's population, are atheists or agnostic. Now, changes within Asian Christianity have been equally profound. The majority of Christians in 1900 were Catholic and Orthodox, mainly in Western Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Philippines. By 2020, the balance had shifted to independent churches, especially house churches in China. Anglicans, absorbed into the Protestant Union churches in India and Pakistan, have declined in proportion to the population, whereas Orthodox churches have consistently decreased through immigration or emigration to the West and the North. Catholics and Protestants have fared better as their mission activities have been effective in encouraging indigenous populations to accept Christianity. The fastest current growth rates are found in South Asia and Southeastern Asia and East Asia. The highest growth rate among Christian families, which is a subcategory of the traditions, from 1970 to 2020, was among the house churches, particularly in China. This growth has slowed considerably since 2015, but 56 million Christians still worship in house churches in Asia. Smaller groups in Asia, such as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Restorationist churches, experience very high growth rates from 1970 to 2020, but they're very small. However, larger groups such as the United Churches, for example, the Church of South India, Church of North India, have also grown significantly since 1970. Mongolia and Nepal are notable for significant Christian growth since 1990 and represent some of the newest expressions of Christianity in the world. Christians in these countries are grappling with what it means to be both Mongolian or Nepalese
William,
and
your voice
authentically
hear clearly. Can you
Christian.
change your device, William?
Cambodia has likewise experienced substantial
Yes,
growth since 1990 in both Nepal and Cambodia. This is due to rigorous mission and evangelistic activities, along with relatively loose state restrictions. But we also have to remember that Asia is the most religiously diverse continent, with large populations of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Christians. Christians in Asia have been more at home with other religionists than Christians in Europe or Northern America. Consequently, they have developed strategies for coexistence that will be crucial for Christians in other parts of the world as migration continues to increase religious diversity. Christians in Asia also assert that Christianity is an Asian religion with ancient roots in Western Asia and robust contextualization with today's cultures. In India, for example, Christian presence is as old as Christianity itself, with the Apostle Thomas visiting Kerala as early as 52, AD 52. But the Indian subcontinent is also home to numerous creative contextualization movements among Hindus, such as Christian ashrams and Hindu believers in Christ. We estimate that Christians in India have grown from 3.8 million, only 1.7% in 1900, to 67 million today, which is about 5%. While Christianity has grown rapidly in 3 of the 5 regions of Asia, Western Asia has seen a steady decline from 23% of the population in 1900 to 5.4% in 2020. And this is largely the result of emigration, and the exodus is still taking place in parts of the region. So let's turn to West Asia now. West Asia is culturally, politically, and religiously very diverse. The region is home to historic Orthodox churches planted by the direct spiritual descendants of Jesus's 12 apostles in the first few centuries of Christianity. These Eastern churches thrived in the region until the Arab conquest of the 7th century. In the wake of Muslim rule, these churches entered a survival mode, a state in which they essentially remain today. Muslims in West Asia remain the majority, rising from 82% of the population in 1970 to 89% in 2020. While Christians made numerical increases over the 50-year period from 6 million to 15 million, they are in decline proportionately. Religious minorities of all kinds face challenges in this region. Christian, Jews, Buddhists, agnostics, and even Muslim traditional groups. Christians in Syria and Iraq have experienced acute suffering in recent times, caught in the middle of civil wars and political struggles. Many Christians fled Iraq for Syria in the early 2000s, only to be caught in the middle of the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011. Tens of thousands of Christians fled Syria for Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon. Most Christians in West Asia are Orthodox, 53% of all Christians, and Catholic, 42% of all Christians. Some Protestant and independent denominations have made modest increases in the region, such as small new Pentecostal or charismatic churches. But Christianity in West Asia declined from 7.4% of the population in 1970 to 5.4% in 2020. Most of that decline was due to death and emigration, with Christians fleeing war-torn and politically unstable areas. Now, what do we expect in the future? Between 2020 and 2050, the Muslim population in North Africa and West Asia will continue to grow both in size and as a percentage at the cost of decreasing minorities in terms of percentage. And Christians are likely to decline from 5%, as we said today, to 3% or even less. Judaism is growing in Israel due to the high birth rates of ultra-Orthodox Jews, and therefore will likely keep its share of the population into the future. At the same time, we expect a large presence of Christian guest workers, many who are from other parts of Asia, in the Gulf states to continue into the future. Now, according to our volume editor of that West Asia volume, Mariz Tadros, who's a Coptic Orthodox scholar, there are at least 4 defining characteristics of Christianity in West Asia. First of all, the region is home to the most ancient expressions and formulations of Christianity. Second, Islam plays a very powerful role in the narrative of Christians across most of the countries in the region. Third, this is the region where Christians are facing the greatest existential risk. Fourth, there's an extraordinary plurality and diversity in this minority Christian
基督教信仰呢，有非常多元化的这样的表达形式，及非常丰富的这样的一个表现形式。
South and Central Asia. South and Central Asia is home to a significant amount of religious diversity with Muslim majority, Hindu majority, and Buddhist majority countries, plus regions that are majority Christian and ethno-religionist. Of the region's 6 major religions, Muslims experienced the fastest growth between 1970 and 2020. And Christianity, as we've said, has a long history in South and Central Asia. There are areas of even of Central Asia that have had flourishing Christian communities several centuries before parts of Europe. After the 8th century rise of Islam in South and Central Asia, Christianity became a minority religion and continues as such today, representing 4% of the population in 2020. No country contains a Christian majority, and most are less than 10% Christian. Kazakhstan has the highest percentage, as you can see here, at 26%. Now, the very modest increase of Christianity in the region has occurred since at least the beginning of the 20th century, where Christians represented 1.5% of the population. By 1970, they were 3.5%. And as I said, by 2020, they were 4%, which is about 75 million. Losses in Central Asia due to emigration were mostly offset by small gains in South Asia. Nepal experienced tremendous growth in its Christian population between 1970 and 2020, from less than 8,000 believers, or less than 1%, to over 1.2 million today. What do we expect in the future? Christians growing at 2.3% on average are growing faster than Hindus in the region, but slightly slower than Muslims. By 2050, it is likely that the Muslim populations of Pakistan, 297 million, and India, 265 million, that's Muslims, will have surpassed that of Indonesia, about 254 million. These are all figures for 2050. Now, according to our scholar, Daniel Jaharaj, who was the editor of the South and Central Asia volume, there are at least 4 major challenges in this region. First of all, Christians constitute a minority, and most struggle for political recognition, social equality, and protection from persecution, discrimination, and systemic economic disempowerment. Second, Christians constitute a vulnerable minority, yet they offer deep insights into the art of Christian living among Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists. Third, they keep the Christian faith alive and active in the midst of risks and discrimination. Their faith in Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord gives them meaning and strength to meet unending challenges. Fourth, Christian ecumenical experiments in South and Central Asia engage with diverse spiritualities, theologies, and liturgies. So in the same way that we saw variety in West Asia, we see much variety here in South and Central Asia. Let's quickly move to East and Southeast Asia. And these are the two of the most religiously diverse regions in the world. In 2020, they were home to significant percentages of Buddhists, 22%, agnostics, 22%, Chinese folk religionists, 20%, Christians, 12%, and Muslims, 12%. Of these large religions, Christianity experienced the fastest growth between 1970 and 2020 at 3.1% per year. Now, Christianity, 282 million Christians, 12% of this region in East and Southeast Asia, has a long history that has reflected the religious, cultural, political, and socioeconomic diversity of the regions. Churches in the regions have experienced the political challenges of colonialism, conflict, communism, and religious fundamentalism. Despite this, Christianity has grown in the region in recent decades. Although in many countries, it still remains a small proportion of the population, most under 10%. Much of the growth has been in the Pentecostal and charismatic churches and often among poor and marginalized people. China is by far home to the largest number of Christians, by our estimate about 106 million in 2020, who are found in both government-sanctioned and underground churches. This region is also home to Asia's only two Christian majority countries, the Philippines and East Timor, both with long Catholic histories. In addition, South Korea has experienced a profound transformation from 0.5% Christian in 1900 to 33.5% in 2020. And that's been studied and continue to be studied by Christians all around the world. Now, East and Southeast Asia is also home to historic Catholic populations, such as the Philippines and Vietnam, both with Christian populations that are more than 80% Catholic. That's the percentage of all Christians are 80% Catholic. The region is also home to newer Protestant and independent churches. And independents grew the fastest between 1970 and 2020, from 12 million to 103 million. Christianity in East and Southeast Asia has been on a gradual increase since 1970, from 5% of the population then to 12% in 2020. Countries with the most significant growth include Brunei, 6% to 12% in that period, China, less than 1% to 7%, also in that period, and Singapore from 8% to 20%. This is from 1970 to 2020. We could also highlight Cambodia, as you see here, where a very small church in the mid-20th century has now grown to 3% of the population, with many diverse expressions of the church across the country. But what do we expect in the future? Christians are projected to grow faster than any other religious group, 1.4% per year, to 18% in 2050. In fact, the percentages of non-religious and Chinese folk religious are expected to decline slightly by 2050, and Buddhists and Muslims are projected to keep pace with the general population growth. Now, according to our volume editor, Filipino scholar Francis Alvarez, and several contributors to that volume, there are at least 4 major challenges for Christians in East and Southeast Asia. First of all, while Christianity definitely manifests some Western influence, it also shows a great variety of indigenous expressions in the region. Secondly, churches use ecumenical platforms in their missional response to the Asian realities of poverty, ecological crises, economic injustice, and violation of human rights. Third, with large numbers of Asians having not heard the Christian message, there is no other continent in the world for which the call for mission is more pronounced. Fourth, any projection of growth in Christianity has to take into account the youth population. The great potential of Christian youth goes in hand with the possibility of unpredictable change. And of course, this is true in all of the regions that we've been looking at. Now, to supplement this largely demographic overview of the Asian church, I would like to conclude by placing the Asian church in the context of global Christianity. What do Christians in Africa, Europe, North America, Latin America, and Oceania have to learn from Asian Christians? I see at least 5 important contributions of the Asian church to the rest of Christianity. First of all, Christianity in Asia is for the most part a minority religion, in some countries with a very small percentage of Christians representing the faith. This is an opportunity for Christians worldwide to move from the Christendom concept of medieval and modern Europe to the models of flourishing in a pluralistic context of the 21st century. These old models are not going to be helpful for us going into the future. But the new models that we see in Asia are the kinds of models that are likely to be helpful for churches around the world as the world becomes increasingly religiously pluralistic. Second, following on that, closely related to this first, Christians in Asia are used to interactions with people of other religions, something not found in European or North American Christianity. This includes daily interactions with Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus. As such, Asian Christians have more robust relationships and closer proximity with those who are farthest from the gospel. Consequently, Asian Christians will have a pivotal role in both interreligious interactions and frontier missions. This picture here is from Singapore, which is the most religiously diverse country in the world. And 9 out of 10 Singaporeans say that they are comfortable living and working alongside people of other ethnic or religious backgrounds. That number is much lower in the Western world. Maybe 1 out of 10 people are comfortable. So you can see who we should be listening to in getting along with people in other religious communities. Third, in frontier missions, unreached peoples, those that have little access or no access to the gospel, there are very high fertility rates, outpacing Christian efforts to reach them. In particular, Muslim fertility rates are much higher than those of people in other religions, including Christianity. All of this has resulted in the inability of Christian growth rates in larger Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist context to keep up with the fertility rates of these communities. Our projections to 2050 were featured in a Christianity Today story that presented this startling graph with a baby hanging on the section of the graph representing these high fertility rates. This shows that we think by the year 2050, probably over a quarter of the world's population will still not have heard the gospel. And these are largely people in the Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist worlds, mostly in Asia. So this is very, very important. One of the reasons for this is that evangelicals invest 100 times more church planting efforts where there are already many Christians than where there are few. While at the same time, our research has shown that peoples that have little access to the gospel are 50 times more responsive to the gospel than those that do have access. And then we also have researched the fact that about 87% of all Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists do not personally know a Christian. And this is where Christians in Asian cultures of hospitality and familiarity with other religions can make a big difference. Fourth, Christianity in Asia has grappled with contextualization at a deeper level than most other regions. The deeply religious identity of most Asians means that Christians have adapted this religio-cultural identity as part of their Christian experience. It also means that Asian churches are producing theology, worship, art, and other aspects of the Christian experience that strengthen global Christianity by offering strong indigenous contributions. And these are this is the artwork on the 3 volumes that I've mentioned at the beginning, indigenous to each of the regions. And artwork is just one of many areas in which Asian Christians have made major contributions. Finally, fifth, according to All Nations International Director Mary Ho, missions from the Asian Church brings with it an appreciation of the role of migration in bringing peoples into contact with each other. She also sees how indigenous mission movements are increasing and how Asian Christian professionals will be the main impetus of missionary outreach using business platforms, career opportunities, and trade routes to the open doors of opportunity. Of course, Korea was a pioneer in this field and continues to contribute to the global spread of Christianity, but many other Christians from Asia are operating along these same lines. Okay, and then in conclusion, I'd just like to say this overview should encourage us that while Christianity took root in Asia 2,000 years ago, in the 21st century, Christians in Asia have a seminal role in both the future of global Christianity and global mission. To answer our earlier question, yes, to be Asian is to be Christian, and to be Christian is to be Asian. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for the very enlightening presentation. So exciting to hear about what God is doing in Asia. Thank you. Before we go to the response, please take note of this important announcement. Just in case of something that we don't like to happen, that we get cut off from this meeting, we can go back again using this backup Zoom ID passcode. You can see that in the chat box. Of course, we don't want it to happen, but it's good to be prepared anyway. Also, just a reminder about the Slido that you can post your questions, and that question, we will be looking at the top questions. You know, as you look at those questions, you can actually like the questions that you want the presenters to respond to. So take time to do that. We will be closing that before we go to the breakout room.